Hello. So let's see. We're going to start the taxonomic lectures for non-social insects today. So I'm going to give the bird's eye view on reptile and amphibian sociality, and then you're going to have a guest lecture by Brendan McEwen on just lizard sociality. So we'll get some really high-level granularity there. Then I will produce a lecture on the sociality of fishes, which actually is quite similar in many ways to reptiles and amphibians because reptiles and amphibians evolved from fish and have a lot of similar reproductive biology in common, at least in broad brushstrokes, and the same sorts of similar drivers that drive various kinds of social structures in reptiles and amphibians also appear to be important in fishes. So those will be quite similar thematically. Then next week, I guess, you will have sociality as a guest lecture from Jennifer Guevara from Ecuador, and then sociality in spiders. And then Leanne Greaves will give you an avian sociality lecture again next week, and that should finish us off. So let's see how far this I get into today. I hope I finish all of it today. All right. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about why it is we even think about sociality in things like reptiles and amphibians that don't tend to evolve highly complex societies like eusocial insects or corvid birds. I say COVID so often. Corvid birds, crows, rooks, ravens, or primates, right? So, if you think about a reptile, you don't think of it living in a highly complex society where that cooperates or where they know kin versus non-kin or where they have any sort of sophisticated level of caring type behavior. But why would you want to study that? Those sorts of topics in a taxa that doesn't tend to evolve heightened levels of sociality. Then we'll talk about the different categories of sociality in reptiles and amphibians. And then it's important to note that this list is not exhaustive. This is just a bird's eye 10,000 foot view of the landscape of sociality in reptiles and amphibians. There are whole books on this topic. Okay, so the propensity to evolve heightened levels of sociality vary across taxa. So we've talked about social insects a lot, wasps and bees. We've talked about primates, we've talked about birds, we've talked about lots of non-primate mammals that have very high levels of sociality and interesting large group dynamics. But lots of organisms on Earth do not regularly exhibit very high levels of sociality. Spiders, reptiles and amphibians, predatory birds, particularly falcons, hawks, and owls, so the raptors, all of these taxa don't tend to evolve high levels of sociality. The thing is that the reason that we study them, and the reason why they're so important, is that if you only study sociality where it exhibits its highest levels, its greatest forms, its most elaborate types and categories, well, you're going to have a biased view of what drives some taxa to evolve sociality and not others. And that's one of the major questions. Why did this taxa become, very highly social, and why did this taxa only exhibit modest levels of sociality? But if you're only studying this one very highly complex series of taxa that have very, sophisticated societies, well, then you're going to have a biased view because they had something about their biology or ecological circumstances that was special about them. And so all these other organisms that don't exhibit such heightened levels of sociality, they must have something different about them, the counterbalance about them that makes sociality less likely to evolve or exhibit high levels of elaboration. And so knowing the impediments are as important as knowing the drivers of very high levels of sociality. And there are taxa in spiders, in herps, in like the Harris hawks, in certain kinds of predatory birds, falcons, that break these rules. And so knowing what allows these specific organisms within these broader taxonomic groups to break that mold and exhibit higher levels of sociality, again, gives you a unique lens to figure out how sociality started and how it breaks free from ecological and evolutionary forces that prevent it from for long periods of time. Okay, parental care versus sociality. So if you start to talk about sociality in reptiles and amphibians, you're going to quickly realize that a lot of what I'm talking about is basically just parental care, right? It's just parents taking care of their offspring. But parental care is still a kind of sociality. When a parent hurts themselves to help their offspring, another individual, that's still altruism. The fact that it's directed towards kin is secondary. It means it makes it more intuitive to understand why it is you might be doing this, right? This is your fecundity, this is your reproduction, they have your genes in common. But the fact that you're still incurring a cost to help another, that's still sociality. So, and very high levels of sociality that you think of in like primates or social insects, if you think about it mechanistically, all these things are really doing is exhibiting behavior they would normally reserve for their own offspring towards others. Sometimes their siblings, sometimes the offspring of other siblings or their parents, or distantly related individuals. But really, most of it's just parental care-like behavior, feeding, defense, grooming, but it's just extended to things that are not their direct offspring. So the same sort of network of genes, morphological features, behavioral features, physiological features that enable them to provide parental care basically are just switched. The stimulus that you use to determine whether or not to deploy that pro-social behavior is broadened to include things that are not your direct offspring. And that's all most sociality really is. All right, so consistent with this sort of notion, pro-sociality, i.e. the tendency to exhibit cooperation or altruism towards individuals that are not your direct offspring, are positively associated with the tendency for that species or for a species to exhibit parental care. So if you reconstruct the evolutionary tree of life for primates, usually you find that this taxa that have the highest level of parental care are also the taxa that have the highest level of pro-sociality. It's also, if you look at species, if you look at the evolutionary tree of life and you try to reconstruct the ancestral character state of almost any highly social taxa, you find that the precursor is usually a parent that takes very good care of its offspring, but yet has not evolved alloparental care for cooperative breeding. So extended parental care and high quality parental care are the typical precursors evolutionarily to more heightened levels of sociality. And if you think about it mechanistically, if it's just breaking down that filter that prevents you from deploying pro-social behavior to individuals other than your offspring, that seems like a relatively simple thing for evolution to break down, provided there are other individuals around you to deploy that pro-social behavior profitably. Okay, so categories of herp sociality. I hope that made sense. Egg retention, egg and nest care, offspring care, and aggregations and cooperation. All right, so most reptiles are oviparous. What does oviparous means? It means it lays an egg. When the baby comes out of its mom, it's still in an egg. It is not live birth. Oviparous. Okay, but that's all well and good. You yolk this offspring, you produce a leathery exterior around the developing embryo to prevent it from desiccating, and then you basically just like plop that baby out someplace in like some soil that's a little bit moist where it won't dry out, and you cover it up and you hope a predator doesn't find the egg. Hooray! Right, oviparous. However, many herps have evolved delayed egg production. So they produce the eggs, it's all encased, it's all set up just like an egg that would be outside of the individual, but they don't push it out. The mom keeps the eggs inside of them for an extended period of time. Well, why would she do that? Well, one, I mean, her body temperature is and her body temperature is probably quite conducive for their development. Inside of her is probably safer than having the egg on the outside of her, right? Each moment that an egg is outside of its mom is an opportunity for a predator to find it. And if a predator finds the mom, she can still run like hell, defend herself, try to seek cover, she has defenses that are quite active. If a predator finds an egg, the egg is screwed. And so many predators are looking for eggs, just tiny little nutrients sitting out there out in the wild, right? So if you can delay the amount of time that an egg has to sit out there in the world defenseless by keeping it inside of you, that's some care you can give that egg. extreme levels of egg retention, it results in ovoviviparity or ovoviviparous species, which means she has the egg hatches inside of the mom, and then baby comes out. Imagine when the baby was inside of its mom, she wasn't like giving it nutrients any longer. There wasn't like a placenta, or anything like that. She just had eggs sitting inside of her, little egg drop soup on the inside. I mean, yeah, anyway, I don't know why that makes sense, but I thought it was adorable. Anyway, so these eggs on the inside of her, and then they hatch. And then she pushes out these offspring and either reabsorbs the nutrients from the eggs or produces the waste from those out in sort of afterbirth. So ovoviviparous, the babies come out alive, but they were sort of in the egg, in the inside of the mom. It's almost like the mom's reproductive tract is the soil for such offspring for them to finish their development, still in the interior of their mother, but encased within an egg. Viviparous species, the offspring are developing not in a discrete egg on the interior of the female, and is much more likely to have nutrient exchange with the offspring, via placenta. And placentas have evolved, or something like a placenta has evolved, at least a couple of times in reptiles, particularly skinks. Okay, so ovoviviparous. I've already said this before. The goal is to keep the eggs safe. Not safe, safe for as long as possible. And the way that you can maintain a safety for your egg is just to keep it with you, right? If you just leave it in a nest, presumably you have to go eat sometime, right? You have to or you might just abandon the nest. Like most herps just abandon their nest where they lay those eggs. And so that once that mother's gone, that means no more nutrients can be provided to the offspring, that the thermal environment, the level of desiccation that the eggs that they experience, and the threat of predation or disease is beyond their control now, right? They're just passive, they're out there in the world. There's a hope that the eggs don't have misfortune befall them. If the egg's inside of you, then you can still engage in a lot of niche construction for your developing offspring. You can get them out of trouble if they get attacked. They're less likely to acquire an external infection because they're still inside of you and have your immune system to defend them. Great. And each moment that the egg is outside of the mom is a chance for some predator to find it. So ovoviviparity is common in a variety of reptiles and amphibians, but it's also present in a lot of fishes as well. So we'll revisit these terms when I talk about sociality in fishes. Viviparous. So truly viviparous species are instances where they're producing live offspring that are developed in the interior of their mom, and they've been provided nutrients probably while they're in there. So this could be via a placenta. I mentioned caecilians in a previous lecture, but basically the female caecilians produce a really thick wall to their reproductive tract that the offspring then just sort of scrape with their mouths, and it produces like a weird caecilian milk. Caecilians are subterranean amphibians that are quite abundant in the tropics and are quite beautiful. I find them kind of beautiful and alien. They can be quite pretty colors. They're not worms, they're actually amphibians. So why would you want to have viviparity? Well, now when you produce offspring, even a tiny little sickly offspring that's mobile is much better defended than an egg. And you want to retain those offspring inside of you for longer. If you do that as a mother and a viviparous mother, then you're going to produce offspring that are at a larger body size. And so having larger offspring that can continue to develop inside of you before they're exposed to the elements, before they're exposed to other ecological pressures, that means that there are going to be fewer relevant predators for you. The bigger the organism is, the fewer the predators that can imperil it. Larger individuals are less likely to succumb to things like desiccation. They're less likely to be able to starve to death because they're going to be able to go for longer without food because they just have larger bodies. And larger size also means that they tend to be faster, i.e. quicker to escape from predation. They tend to be healthier, so like they're not so likely to succumb to a disease. They are more physiologically robust. They're more likely to be able to maintain homeostasis. If you're a teeny tiny organism, it's hard to maintain homeostasis in a dynamic world around you. If you're a large organism, then fluctuations in the world around you have relatively comparatively minor impacts on your physiology, and your ability to maintain homeostasis is enhanced by being larger. So viviparous, it's great because when you produce offspring, they're mobile, they have their own defenses, but particularly you want to and under ideal circumstances, produce huge offspring that basically have a jump start on life where so many of the things that kill eggs and so many things that kill teeny tiny offspring will not imperil your offspring because you're taking good care of them. You are viviparous. It's hard to imagine that live birth is actually kind of like something that's cooperative, but it is extending care to something that is not you. And this is not a clone. So why not be viviparous? Talk about all the great things of being viviparous, or ovoviviparous. Why not just maintain your eggs inside of you forever? Why would you ever want to get rid of these eggs? Well, because it's costly to have these eggs inside of you, right? Like, I mean, look at this poor fat bearded dragon on the right-hand side here. This is a female. She has eggs inside of her, and she can barely move, right? So when you're a mother and you've got these offspring sucking up your nutrients or just sitting inside of your belly to finishing their development, this is costly for you, right? You can't run as fast as a mom. So if a predator runs after you, you're gonna have a big old swollen belly, it's hard for you to run like hell and get away from them. If you're taking care of those offspring and you're feeding them, oftentimes you can't exhibit such a heightened level of immunity of your immune system. So some mothers suppress their immune systems when they're rearing offspring. They're more likely to get sick when they have these offspring developing inside of them. They have inferior foraging performance. Lots of these mothers either have a hard time dragging themselves around to the various patches that have the fruits or vegetables that they're consuming, or are predatory themselves. If the mother is a predator and relies on her quick speed to be able to capture prey, well, she's going to be less effective at foraging, remaining cryptic, running quickly, in order to capture her own prey. So she's probably experiencing a bit of starvation in order to keep these offspring inside of her and developing. And then there's a risk of total bust, right? So like the problem with this strategy is that you're putting all of your eggs in one maternal basket, right? So if mama gets killed, like babies are going down too. So like you're protecting them, you've got this awesome developmental environment for them, but if you go down, the mothership goes down, all the babies die too. Versus if you were laying out your eggs out all over the place in many nests or without a nest, just like sort of laying them out into the environment, the odds of them all succumbing at once to a shared pressure is much lower. So this is like a concentrated stock portfolio by putting all of your eggs inside of you and hoping you don't die. All right. Egg care varieties. So one of the ways that you can care for an egg is just provide it larger yolk. So the parent gives more yolk to the offspring, and that means the offspring has more nutrients to develop to a larger size, to have a better physiological starting state, to have a higher functioning immune system, et cetera, et cetera. More nutrients means cross-contextually better news for the offspring, even if they never see their mom ever again. Water provisioning. A lot of eggs, although people think of eggs as like, once it's an egg, nothing bad can it's like sealed up hermetically. That's not true. Eggs can desiccate very quickly. They have to be laid in the proper soil with the proper level of nutrients, proper level of surrounding water in the soil so they don't desiccate, the right temperature because that will determine what sex they develop at, et cetera, et cetera. And will also determine their the water level inside of the soil will also determine the probability of various kinds of external infections and probably what kinds of predators are likely to find them as well. But many herps will engage in, once they've laid their eggs, basically urinating on the eggs and on the soil to give the eggs one last jolt of water. A lot of eggs and a lot of herps end up drying out, and that's the way they die. And so parents who need that water for themselves oftentimes will urinate on the eggs after they've laid them, like this Chilida serpentina, this snapping turtle on the right-hand side here, and that imbues the eggs with an important source of water. Without that urine, they're more likely to desiccate and perish. Doesn't seem like an important amount of parental care, you're just peeing on your babies, but like, actually, if you're intending to use that water for yourself, that's kind of a big deal. Nest protection. So, I mean, if you can defend a nest, then consider it, right? Lots of herps cannot really effectively defend their nests, and their presence being on top of their nest would just highlight to predators where their nest is, right? So like if you're a Nolus lizard and you lay all of your eggs in this like little nest area and then you cover them up with soil and then sit on top of it reliably, most predators that can eat an anolis lizard's eggs can eat an anolis lizard, right? So you're just a red flag. Like, here are my babies, come kill them and me too. Like, no. But herps that can defend themselves, Komodo dragons, they'll defend their eggs for 3 months out of a 9-month period. Cobras, pythons, lots of organisms that can defend their eggs effectively will defend their eggs. So male king cobras, like on the right-hand side here, will sit atop nests in some instances and defend the eggs from intrusion by could-be predators, right? A predator that can eat an egg of a king cobra might think twice before it tries to fuss with a king cobra, right? So same thing with a Komodo dragon. You might be able to eat a Komodo dragon egg, but guess what? Komodo dragon comes running after you. Let me tell you, quite intimidating. You're quite likely to run like hell. In fact, Brendan McEwen has seen, and I've seen Komodo dragons, we were together this time, in the field. We've seen Komodo dragons chase after other Komodo dragons when their nests are imperiled. It's quite intimidating. Even the Komodo dragon is not running at you in your direction. These are big, scary lizards, rattlesnakes, lots of organisms that defend their eggs. Do so because they have weaponry to defend their eggs. Defending your eggs doesn't work if you yourself are defenseless. All right, nest protection, you got it there. Thermal generation. So pythons are quite neat because that not only do they encircle their eggs and defend them, but the mother pythons can basically flex their muscles back and forth over and over and over, and it basically is like weird, slow python shivering that produces a huge amount of heat. Almost all of homeothermy, your ability to maintain metabolic body heat, is generated by things that are quite like muscles. Concentrated muscles and firing them all the time produces a huge amount of body heat. If you're cold on the way to school in the morning, jog a little bit. You're quite good at creating body heat by activity. These pythons that are ectotherms, that do not have any particularly unique cells to create a homeothermic environment, can shiver enough using normal musculature to produce quite a lot of body heat and keep their eggs warm. This is energetically incredibly costly for these pythons, and they're using their musculature and their physiology creatively to basically accomplish what a lot of things like birds use or mammals use, right? These are even viviparous mammals use our own homeothermy to keep our offspring at a constant useful temperature for their development. These pythons don't have homeothermy, but they can use their musculature to do the poor man's version of it. Poor person's version of it. Women can be poor too, and everybody in between. All right, so egg care, pros and cons. Your eggs are more likely to survive. That's great. Enhanced starting offspring condition. Your eggs are going to probably be in better shape, right? You've maintained them at the right temperature. You've kept them in the right environment. They haven't been assaulted. You might be able to even clean your eggs in some instances. Hooray for you. Problem. Why aren't all of the scary reptiles caring for their offspring? Well, it's not all fun and games. It costs a lot to do this, right? So it locks the parents down to one spot. If you have to be here defending your eggs, that means you have opportunity costs that you can't be off foraging. You can't be off finding other females or males to mate with you. You can't be off, I don't know, fighting off that infection that you've got right now, or finding the right microhabitat for you, for your own body temperature. Instead, you've got to sit here with these eggs and protect them. And that can be a drag. It's a lot of opportunity costs, opportunities missed. So time and energy devoted to eggs can't go elsewhere. Yep, if you're spending your time and energy defending these eggs or shivering around them, all those calories could have been used making your next set of offspring, or getting some food, or fighting off infections, or finding mates, or doing whatever else reptiles do with their free time, right? A lot of it is basically just sitting still, but there could be more of that if you weren't sitting atop these eggs. Yeah. And then parents might be more susceptible to shared predators. So defenseless reptiles typically don't defend their eggs, but reptiles that can defend themselves, and amphibians, but mostly reptiles that can defend themselves, do to protect their eggs, right? But there are still predators that can take on a Komodo dragon. There are still predators that can take on a rattlesnake. And so there's a greater incentivization for a predator to imperil you and your eggs simultaneously, because they could get 2 meals. If they can eat you, they're going to eat your eggs too. So you can all sort of also come at once. Moreover, you're probably more conspicuous to predators who are looking for food if you've got you and these eggs that can be spotted together. Nests oftentimes have a characteristic look, soil disturbances, certain kinds of microhabitats, they have smells, they can be detected visually, and so there are just more cues that are available to predators searching their environment if they're looking for both you or your eggs, because both of those things are going to produce lots of different stimuli that a predator can detect and exploit. A shared predator. Parental care varieties. All right, so let's see. Offspring transport. Moving the offspring around. Crocodilians do this all the time. You've probably seen this on the Nature Channel, where like crocodiles will basically pick up, alligators will do this too, pick up their offspring from a nest and carry them over to the water. So, and that's important because lots of things can eat baby crocodilians that on land, and they can dry out on land and just get lost trying to find the water. Parental crocodilians are actually quite sophisticated parents that will carry their young to the water where they're much safer. It's also important to note that birds and dinosaurs evolved from things like crocodiles and alligators. And so one of the shared uniting features of archosaurs, which includes crocodiles, alligators, most dinosaurs, and birds, is a reasonably high level of parental care and actually sociality. I mean, crocodilians are pretty good parents, and most birds are comparatively good parents relative to most of animal life. And so that's a uniting feature. So crocodilians oftentimes are poster children, poster species for heightened levels of sociality and parental care. Offspring defense, short-term and long-term. So there are at least anecdotal reports and some modest case studies that suggest that crying vocalizations from baby crocodilians can recruit their mother and other mothers to those distress calls for weeks, months, sometimes years later. We're going to talk more about social skinks with Brendan, so I'm not going to talk too much about social skinks, but sometimes the offspring stay in the natal nest with their parents for a long period of time, and then just being near a parent also means they're less likely to be killed or hurt, usually by other rival groups of social skinks, but sometimes predators as well. So offspring can stay with their parents in a shared colony, which in the case of social skinks is just a pile of rocks usually, or sometimes a shared den. So in very high levels of sociality that are observed in Egernia, the social skinks, and to a lesser degree, night lizards, Xanthusia, I think, those kinds of sociality are typically associated with the nest being the nuclei of the formation of that social structure and the elaboration of that social structure. So just like it was in wasps, just like it was in bees, there's a central nest that forms the basis of sociality. Is it the fortress defense hypothesis? Well, with crocodilians, not so much. The crocodilians, once they're done with their offspring, they don't need this nest as a resource to like live atop. But with Egernia, these social skinks, which exhibit even higher levels of sociality, yeah, actually they have to defend this giant pile of rocks from other rival groups or individuals that might become interlopers and try to evict them. So the fortress defense hypothesis does sort of work out a little bit with Egernia, the social skinks, but not so much with social crocodilians. Okay, egg care, pros and cons. Sounds really similar to the pros and cons of egg retention and egg defense. So enhanced offspring survival. You're more likely to have, this is not egg care, this is offspring care. Is that true? Yeah, this is not egg care, this is offspring care, pros and cons. Enhanced offspring survival, that's right. If you take care of your offspring, they're more likely to live. The first few days, the first few months they're with you, that means that they're going to be able to figure out some things about their environment and about how to survive in it and embellish and grow upon their instincts under your care, under your, not tutelage, but under your care. Enhanced offspring starting condition. The longer that they can spend with you, where they're sort of like experiencing reduced risk, means that when they finally go cold turkey and have to like leave the nest, they're going to do so at a larger body size, and that means that fewer things are going to be able to imperil them. The abiotic environment's less stressful for them, and they're going to be more likely to fend off things like disease. And that's all good. Starting off life bigger is usually great cross-contextually out there in the world. All right. But however, if you're sitting around there taking care of your offspring in a pile of rocks or a nest or whatever, that means, again, the parents have to be in that general vicinity. They can't be going off doing something else. time and energy that they spend defending these offspring is time and energy that they can't spend to all the other features of life that would help them reproduce again and survive themselves or acquire mates. And then finally, parents may be more susceptible to shared predators still. So yeah, you're not locked with the eggs. The offspring are somewhat mobile, but if you have to maintain, be in the general neighborhood of your offspring to acquire, to reap the benefits of defending them, then it's still more likely that something is going to be able to find you. If very large crocodilians, it's not really that big of a deal if something finds you. Once you're at like a 12-foot or like 4-meter crocodilian, like the world is a much safer place. So like in those instances, it's not such a big deal. But like a social skink or some social snakes, like rattlesnakes, this can actually turn into a reasonably imperiling thing if you're stuck to an area taking care of offspring. Aggregations. So lots of herps get into aggregations, and these are typically breeding aggregations for most herps. They get together in big, giant, panmictic copulatory situations. I was trying to avoid the obviously anthropomorphic thing to say, but basically just giant social copulatory interactions. Yes, so that's the typical way that herps get together. But sometimes herps get together with shared hibernacula. A hibernaculum is just a domicile, a cave, a thing that you spend, some structure that you spend your winter in. You hibernate inside of this thing. Lots of herps, not that many herps, some herps, like rattlesnakes or garter snakes, will concentrate in huge numbers, hundreds or thousands of individuals in shared overwintering chambers, hibernacula. A singular version, hibernaculum. So also aggregations can form when there's a habitat saturation. In order to live our lives as these social skinks, we got to be in a pile of rocks. There are only so many piles of rocks in this outback that are appropriate for us, so we're together because like there's nowhere else to go. And if they're saturated, they tend to stick with their natal pile of rocks with their relatives. True cooperation. So true cooperation is relatively uncommon in reptiles and amphibians, where you have joint assistance. So some social skinks will engage in shared defense of a territory, which is more effective, shared defense of offspring, shared excavation. These desert skinks on the right-hand side here live in social groups, and they all excavate their shared refuge together. That's a kind of cooperation. Many hands make light work. Crocodilians, there are reports, although this is like, it's hard to know whether or not this is real, but it might be real, that crocodiles that are ambushing singleton prey but are doing so in a shared vicinity are more likely to confuse their prey, frighten their prey, break up their prey's organizational structures as they're trying to traverse things like rivers, and that might mean that predators are more likely to be able to isolate and consume prey, subdue them more effectively. So yeah, maybe that's true. It stands to reason that that might work with things like wildebeest crossing rivers with many crocodilians present. Do they really intend to cooperate? No, this is probably a byproduct mutualism, where like we're just all trying to do the best thing for ourselves, but the fact that we're doing it next to each other is mutually beneficial. Like, I don't really want you to get a wildebeest. I don't really care whether you get a wildebeest or not. But the fact that we're both thrashing at these wildebeests, at this herd, trying to cross this river together, they're going to get confused. They're going to get blood in the water. They're going to little prey brains. They're going to scream for life. And that's going to give us opportunities, shared opportunities. That'll mean I'm more likely to get prey and you're more likely to get prey, at least hypothetically. We don't know if this is true or not because you can't really do experiments of moving giant Nile crocodiles around in East Africa, can you? Like, no, just not going to happen. No one's going to give you that money. It's also going to be quite dangerous. And although it kind of sounds like the Wild West, like, wouldn't that be fun? Like Cowboy Central, like it also is, you know, like it would probably be unethical, right? Anyway, where are you going to put all those crocodiles, huh? Anyway, so kin recognition. Some herps are also capable of identifying kin from non-kin. Rattlesnakes and larval amphibians are the classic example of this. If you so larval amphibians oftentimes can have a foraging polymorphism. So larval amphibians for many species can develop into a carnivorous form or an herbivorous form. The carnivorous form eats the herbivorous form developing larvae. So they can eat their siblings hypothetically, or non-siblings that are developing in the same pools as them. if you rear these amphibians in kin groups, when they're surrounded by kin, these carnivorous forms are less likely to develop, and they're less likely to fully consume and cannibalize kin when they have a kin versus non-kin option. So they're more likely not to develop carnivorous forms when they're forced to live with kin. If given a choice between cannibalizing kin versus non-kin, they're less likely to cannibalize kin. And that suppression of cannibalism is a kind of cooperation. I would normally eat you, but the fact that I'm just not going to eat you because you're my kin. And that suppression of aggression actually is a kind of tender kind of cooperation. It's just not as soft-hearted as a lot of the kinds of cooperation that immediately come to mind when you think of cooperation. Rattlesnakes, the classic examples with these, the classic experiments with these are basically if you just allow sister baby rattlesnakes or sister rattlesnakes to reside in experimental chambers together, sisters, relative to non-sisters, are much more likely to make contact with each other, to basically get engaged in little like rattlesnake cuddle piles with each other, and they're more likely to try to form, at least under experimental conditions, shared hibernacula with sisters relative to non-sister associations. And so once they live in those hibernacula together, that's important because if a predator comes into a hibernaculum, all of those rattlesnakes will rattle at the same time, providing a shared alarming. If the predator continues to stumble in there and try to molest them, now they've got not just flicking venomous fangs, but they've got multiple sets of flicking venomous fangs, so they have shared defense. And then for the species that also have parental care, the mothers nearby caring for their offspring reduces the odds that any one predator is going to go in there and not be attended to via multiple angry mother rattlesnakes. So rattlesnake sociality, they also have kin recognition, and they're more likely to form, if they're given the opportunity, social hibernacula with relatives. So at that was 35 minutes. I finished exactly what I wanted to get finished today. My God, I thought it would never happen. But Brendan is going to be giving a talk about social lizards, I think Wednesday? And if not, I'll give a talk about sociality in fishes, all of the fishes. I think it's like 35,000 species of fish. It's like, I know it's multiple tens of thousands of species of fish, like 35,000 or 45,000. So there's a lot of different kinds of sociality in fish. We're going to cover broad brushstrokes, what sociality in fish looks like in contrasting forms, with some examples, just like we did in reptile and amphibian sociality. But it is not exhaustive, obviously. We'll have a special in focus on lizards, just because Brendan knows a lot about lizards, and they're kind of neat. All right, so with that, I will leave you guys be. Have a good day. Have a good one. I'm going to upload this now.